What would a space marine fear, if he finally realized the Emperor could no longer hear him? The question drifted like a poisoned whisper through the void, carried on currents no mortal ear could detect, but felt, deeply, by the one warrior who had spent a lifetime believing fear had been surgically carved out of him. Brother Captain Aurelin Thestis, forged in the gene foundries of Terra, decorated 100 times in the Emperor's name, stood motionless aboard the silent strike cruiser Vigilant Flame. The stars outside the viewport shimmered with cold indifference, but something inside Aurelin churned with a heaviness he could neither name nor expel. He had known pain, duty, sacrifice, but this was different. This was doubt, a forbidden fracture forming in a mind engineered to be unbreakable. For weeks, Aurelin had felt an unspoken disturbance. Not in the warp, no, that was too common, too expected, but in something far more sacred. For as long as he had lived, he had sensed the Emperor's presence, a distant but resolute warmth at the edges of his consciousness. Every space marine felt it, though they rarely spoke of it, a guiding spark, subtle yet constant, woven into the very marrow of their loyalty. But now that spark flickered, waned, and for the first time in his enhanced life, Aurelin sensed nothing. A hollow, a dead frequency where divine purpose once thrummed. He had told no one, not his chaplains, not his librarians, not even the venerable dreadnought who had once been his closest mentor. He feared that admitting what he felt might doom him. Space Marines did not doubt. They did not falter. They did not question. And yet the silence from the Emperor pressed harder each passing day, like a weight crushing his enhanced lungs. His dreams, he was not supposed to dream, yet he did, were filled with darkened throne rooms and a figure slumped in a machine of gold, unmoving, unbreathing, unreachable. The ship's corridors echoed with the rhythmic footfalls of warriors preparing for deployment, but Aurelin found no comfort in the familiar sound. There was a subtle wrongness in the air, a tension coiling through the halls like an unseen predator stalking its prey. Command dispatches had become irregular. Astropathic signals arrived garbled. Imperial outposts near the Gathos Rift had gone dark one by one, as if snuffed out by an invisible hand. And now the Vigilant Flame had been ordered to investigate a distress signal of unknown origin, one that carried the unmistakable signature of a human voice repeating a single word over and over. Run. But it wasn't the message that chilled Aurelin. It was the voice, muted, strangled, layered with agony, and somehow, impossibly familiar. He could not shake the feeling that he had heard it before, long ago, in a place his memory refused to reveal. As he stood alone in the dimmed stratagem, the Emperor's silence gnawed at the edges of his sanity. What if the whisper in his mind, the doubt he dared not speak, was true? What if the Emperor, the master of mankind, the being for whom Aurelin had killed, bled, and sacrificed every shred of humanity, was not watching anymore? What if he had never been watching at all? Aurelin's gauntleted hands tightened until the ceramite joints creaked. Behind him, the automatic doors slid open with a hiss, but he did not turn. He already knew who had entered. He had sensed her presence long before the doors parted. "Captain," said a voice both sharp and steady, belonging to Sister Archivist Maedra Valley, one of the few Imperial scholars permitted to travel with a Space Marine strike force. "The distress signal has changed." She hesitated, a crack in her usually unshakable composure. "It is now calling your name." Aurelin finally turned, his expression unreadable, beneath the shadows of the stratagem. But inside, something icy clawed up his spine. His name spoken by a voice begging him to run. And spoken in the Emperor's silence. For the first time in his life, Brother Captain Aurelin felt truly, utterly alone. And somewhere in the deep void ahead, the truth waited, terrifying, inevitable, and ready to shatter everything he believed. Aurelin had faced the horrors of the galaxy, Xenos monstrosities that could tear apart tanks with a breath, traitor warbands twisted by impossible mutations, warp storms that swallowed entire fleets, but nothing clawed at his mind like hearing his own name whispered from the void. A Space Marine's name was sacred, spoken only by brothers, commanders, or the Emperor himself. Not by a stranger, not by a dying voice carried across a star system like a final, desperate breath. He followed Sister Maedra down the corridor as the Vigilant Flame's metal walls vibrated with low, disharmonic hums. The distress signal was growing erratic, oscillating wildly between frequencies, as if someone, or something, was struggling to push the message through a veil of suffocating darkness. The normal shipboard sounds, servo motors, cogitator relays, distant bolter drills, seemed muffled, swallowed by an oppressive stillness that deepened with every step. The voice, Maedra said, keeping pace beside him. It isn't just calling to you anymore. It's changing, like someone else is speaking through it. Her eyes were sunken, sleepless. Scholar or not, the message had shaken her. It's as though multiple versions of the same man are trapped inside the signal. Orelin didn't reply, but his jaw tightened. Warp interference could twist transmissions, mimic voices, distort reality itself, but this felt different. This felt targeted, personal, invasive. As if whoever, or whatever, was sending the message knew exactly who he was and what he feared. They entered the Vox chamber, a circular room filled with suspended crystal lattice amplifiers designed to parse long-distance signals. The chamber was dim, the light flickering like the last heartbeat of a dying star. Tech priests chanted in monotone, but even their mechadendrites trembled with static unease. The signal echoed through the chamber, distorted, fragmented, yet unmistakably human. Oh, Orelin. A shrill burst of static swallowed the voice, then it returned, weaker. Run, before. Silence. Then a distorted scream, not of pain, but of warning. Madra's fingers danced across her slate. There's a pattern. It's looping every 40 seconds, but each loop is deteriorating. It's as if the sender is being consumed by something while speaking. Consumed. Orelin's mind recoiled at the word, but it explained the jagged, collapsing edges of the message. Something was devouring the signal at its source. He stepped closer to the primary amplifier. Amplify the earliest fragment, he commanded. The tech priest obeyed, and the first version of the voice played, cleaner, less broken, but trembling with unbearable fear. Captain Orelin Thestis, do not come here. Do not answer this signal. You do not understand what. A violent crackle cut the sentence short. Madra inhaled sharply. He knows your full name. Orelin did not answer. His pulse quickened, something exceedingly rare for a Marine. Only two possibilities existed. Either an Imperial soul who knew him was trapped on that desolate world ahead, or something inhuman was wearing his voice like a mask. Then the next loop played automatically. But this time, it wasn't fear in the voice. It was resignation, a hollow acceptance of an already decided fate. Orelin, I am sorry. I tried to resist, but you will follow this signal. That is how the story always begins. The chamber froze. Even the tech priest stopped chanting. Always begins. What did that mean? Madra whispered, this sounds impossible. As if he expects you to hear him. As if he believes this has happened before. Temporal anomalies, warp echoes, time fractures. Orelin had heard of them, but never encountered one. And yet the message sent a shiver through his reinforced spine, a feeling like being watched by something that had known him far longer than he had lived. Then the final version of the loop played. A broken whisper, barely more than a dying breath. Orelin, please, don't betray him. Madra's eyes widened. Betray the Emperor. Who would say such a... She didn't finish, because the moment the words left the speakers, the air around Orelin felt as if a cold hand had gripped his throat. Betrayal was the ultimate sin. The one wound a loyal Marine could never imagine inflicting. Yet the voice had spoken it, directly, pleadingly, as if begging Orelin to change a future he had never imagined. But then the most horrifying question rose from the depths of Orelin's mind, one he dared not breathe. Why did the voice sound like him? Because beneath the distortion, beneath the agony, beneath the layers of fragmented time. It did. It sounded exactly like Captain Orelin Thestis, older, broken, and dying. The signal wasn't from a stranger. It wasn't even from a foe. It was from himself. The revelation settled over the chamber like a suffocating fog. For a moment, Orelin felt untethered from reality, as if the metal floor beneath him had vanished and he was suspended in the cold void, weightless and spiraling. A space marine's mind was engineered to withstand terror, warp madness, even psychic assault, but nothing in his creation had prepared him to hear his own dying voice calling from a world he had never once set foot upon. Madra's gaze flickered between him and the speakers, searching for any rational explanation she could cling to. Captain, perhaps it is a mimic. A warp echo, a deception designed to lure you. Her tone strained with forced logic, but her trembling hands betrayed the truth. She didn't believe her own words. Orelin forced himself to breathe, each inhale sharp and mechanical. I know my own voice. He hated the sound of the words as they left him. Hated that they felt like an admission of weakness. And whatever sent that message knows me. Intimately. Too intimately, Madra whispered. This feels premeditated. Premeditated. The word slithered into his mind and coiled tight. Who could possibly plan such a thing? Who could predict the movements of a space marine, let alone a captain entrusted with investigating a vanishing frontier? Who, or what, could know the exact cadence of his voice decades older, worn down by horrors yet to come? The thought gnawed at him like a parasite burrowing deeper into flesh. Before he could speak again, a jolt of static surged through the amplifiers. The chamber lights flickered violently. Cogitators buzzed and sputtered. One of the tech priests convulsed as arcs of electric discharge crackled across his mechadendrites. Then the speakers erupted, not with a message, but with a sound that did not belong in the realm of mankind. A distorted, layered roar reverberated through the room, like a chorus of voices dragged screaming across the warp and forced into a single monstrous throat. The sound vibrated Orelon's reinforced bones, clawing at his skull from the inside. Maedra stumbled backward. That is no human voice. Before she could finish, the roar snapped into a whisper. A single word, so soft that it almost felt like a thought instead of sound. Closer. The voice was neither Orelon's nor the original speaker's. This one was ancient, hungry, watching. Orelon felt something brush against his consciousness, light as a feather, cold as a corpse. A probing presence, testing him, measuring the boundaries of his mind. He instinctively raised his psychic defenses. Every Marine, even non-librarians, had basic mental fortification, but the presence skirted the edges like smoke slipping through cracks. Then it vanished, cleanly, deliberately. Maedra steadied herself. Captain, we cannot pursue this signal. It is clearly warp corrupted. It is dangerous, possibly lethal, certainly heretical. Orelon cut her off with a gesture. Plot the coordinates. Her voice rose with disbelief. You cannot be serious. You heard what the message said. It warned you not to come. Warnings did not matter. Fears did not matter. Orders did. Duty did. But that was not the true reason Orelon refused to turn back. The real reason was the silence. The Emperor's silence. If the Emperor still guided him, he would feel it, would sense that unseen warmth bolstering his resolve. Instead there was only the emptiness in the corners of his mind, the place where his light once glimmered like a distant star. Orelon knew the Lectitio Divinitatis taught that the Emperor's will was felt in ways too subtle to comprehend, but he had lived his entire life with that subtlety as a constant. And now that it was gone, he was drifting. He needed answers, and the dying voice, his own voice, might hold them. Maedra realized she could not sway him. The crew will hesitate, she said quietly. Chaplains will protest. Librarians will demand psychic quarantine. The Mechanicus will want to purge the signal. They will obey, Orelon replied, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears. In the corner of the chamber, one of the tech priests rose shakily, servo limbs twitching. Captain, the coordinates embedded in the signal trace back to a world not present on any Imperial chart. Uncharted, Orelon asked. More than uncharted, the tech priest corrected. Erased. There are signs, someone deliberately removed it from the navigational records. Orelon's eyes narrowed. Why erase a world? To bury something, Maedra said, voice grim. Or someone. Orelon stepped toward the main console, staring at the pulsing red dot marking the signal's source. A forgotten world. A forbidden voice. A presence watching him from the warp. And the Emperor's silence pressing against him like a blade. Everything inside him screamed that this was the kind of path that led Marines to madness, to corruption, to damnation. But the dying voice had begged him not to betray the Emperor. Begged him to turn back. Begged him to run. Orelon clenched his jaw. He would not run. He would uncover the truth. Even if the truth was the very thing destined to break him. The vigilant flame cut through the void like a blade, its engines humming with a restrained tension that matched the mood of every soul aboard. Word of the signal had spread through the ship's Vox channels like wildfire, strained whispers between serfs, hushed conversations among battle brothers, even cautious speculation from the ranking chaplains. Space Marines were not prone to gossip, yet something about this mission stoked an unease none of them could fully articulate. They did not fear war. They feared the unknown, and the unknown was calling their captain by name. Orelon stood in the command sanctum, eyes fixed on the hololithic projection of the star system they were entering. The world at its center flickered in and out of existence like a faulty memory struggling to surface. The planet was there, then gone, then there again, as if reality itself could not decide whether to acknowledge it. Each flicker left a faint psychic sting against Orelon's mind, like a knife lightly tracing the surface of his thoughts. Designation withheld, droned the ship's cogitator voice. Imperial records, absent. Mapping data, unstable. Planetary class, indeterminate. Atmospheric readings. Contradictory. Contradictory. A world that could not decide what it was. Madra stood beside him, pale but resolute. Captain, this is not natural. Something has cloaked this planet in a shroud that even the machine spirit struggles to penetrate. Aurelin did not turn away from the shifting hologram. Can the shroud be pierced? With time, she said. But the longer we remain here, the greater the risk. Warp interference is escalating. Sensors are fracturing. We may lose orientation entirely if the distortion spreads. Time. Aurelin felt the word echo through him with grim irony. Time was the enemy here. The voice, his voice, had sounded as though time itself had devoured him, warping his final warning into broken loops. If this place could manipulate time enough to distort a message, what would it do to those who dared approach it? A warning flared on the hololithic display. Unregistered psychic anomaly detected. Aurelin felt it before the machine announced it. A ripple, almost imperceptible, washed over the ship. A sensation like cold fingers brushing his armor, probing for cracks. Not hostile, but curious. Testing. Madra gripped the rail. The planet is aware of us. The words were not hyperbole. Aurelin sensed it too, an attention turning toward them from the world below, vast and patient. It was a sensation that did not belong to any human mind. The hololith flickered violently, and for a heartbeat the projection sharpened into terrifying clarity, a barren world scarred with immense trenches that spiraled out from a single point, like the impact crater of a fallen god. The trenches pulsed faintly with a sickly glow. Then the image dissolved again, replaced with static. Madra stared. Whatever happened on that world, it carved itself into the landscape. Aurelin felt a tightening in his chest. Because in that fleeting moment of clarity, when he had seen the center of the crater, he had recognized its shape. A structure. A monolithic tower of unknown origin. And it matched something he had seen before, though he could not recall where or when. A memory buried so deeply it felt stolen. The silence in the sanctum deepened as the ship drifted closer to the planet's orbit. Then the message came again. Unbidden, unavoidable, a whisper directly into Aurelin's mind, so faint he almost mistook it for his own thoughts. Do not land. Do not look upon it. You were never meant to see what lies beneath. Aurelin staggered, the whisper slicing into him with haunting familiarity. It was the dying voice again. His voice. Madra noticed the shift in his posture. Captain. But he didn't answer. Because the whisper continued, threading through his mind like a fraying rope pulling him toward madness. You will break the chain. You will start the cycle. It always begins with you. Aurelin's pulse thudded painfully against the inside of his armor. Cycle. Chain. Always. Time twisted around the words like a serpent. Madra took a step toward him. If you are hearing something, you must tell me. He finally turned to her, and though his expression remained carved in stone, she saw the truth in his eyes, fear, buried under layers of duty and defiance. Before either of them could speak further, the hololith stabilized for a single, horrifying instant. This time, the projection did not show a crater. It showed a symbol. A sigil burned across the planet's surface, so massive it could only be seen from orbit. A symbol shaped like a fractured halo, encircling a black sun. Aurelin's armor sensors flared with alarms. Madra recoiled. That is no natural formation, she gasped. That is a mark. Aurelin felt his blood run cold. Not because he recognized it, but because he didn't. A symbol that enormous should appear in every heresy archive, every Mechanicus data vault, every forbidden tome of ancient cults. Yet it was absent from his memory, completely. Something had erased knowledge of this symbol the same way it had erased the planet. Madra's voice cracked. Captain, I believe this world was purged from existence. Aurelin clenched his fists. Not destroyed, purged, hidden. By who? The Mechanicus, the Inquisition, the Emperor himself, or something older, something capable of silencing entire worlds. His mind kept circling back to one inescapable truth. His dying voice had come from that world. His future self, broken, terrified, begging him not to come. But he was already here, already descending, already caught in the gravity of a fate that felt too heavy to escape. Aurelin took a final breath and gave the order that would seal his destiny. Prepare the drop barges, because whatever waited on that world, whatever truth had been buried, whatever horror had erased itself from history, Aurelin would face it, even if doing so was the very act that would one day destroy him. The drop barges rumbled with a low, thunderous vibration as they detached from the vigilant flame, cutting through the void toward the nameless world below. Inside the lead barge, Aurelin stood perfectly still, yet every molecule of air seemed to tremble around him. Space Marines were engineered without fear, but the sensation twisting in his chest felt dangerously close to it. Not fear of death, not fear of war, but fear of the unknown truth waiting on that world, a truth so terrible it had been erased from memory, from history, from the very records of existence. Around him, his squad checked and rechecked their weapons with ritual precision. Brother Rhex, ever vigilant, traced purity seals across his bolter. Brother Kalis muttered catechisms under his breath. Even hardened transhuman warriors felt an instinctive discomfort they could not name. The silence inside the barge was unnatural. No banter, no murmured battle prayers, only the metallic rasp of armor and breath. Maedra sat strapped beside a cargo restraint, knuckles white around her data slate. She had insisted on coming, despite his objections. Knowledge is my duty, she had said. In this, whatever this is, no single Marine should face it alone. But now, staring at the flickering readings scrolling across her slate, she seemed smaller, swallowed by the gravity of what waited below. Aurelin broke the silence. Report. Maedra swallowed, her voice thin. Atmospheric readings fluctuate between breathable and toxic every 9 seconds. Gravity shifts by 0.06 intervals without any predictable pattern. Thermal signatures appear, unstable. Unstable, Aurelin repeated. She hesitated, as if the planet is alternating between different states. Like it is remembering and forgetting itself. The words chilled him more than any alien threat could. A world that forgot itself. Aurelin braced as the barge shook violently. Rhex steadied himself. Atmospheric entry, he announced, but even his voice held a crack of uncertainty. Through the armored viewport, the first glimpse of the world emerged, a swirling, bruised sky riven with lightning that didn't fork downward, but sideways, drawn toward invisible points in the air. The clouds churned unnaturally, forming and dispersing in shapes that suggested faces, silhouettes, half-formed impressions of things that shouldn't exist. The land below looked dead, not barren in the way of lifeless rock, but as though something had drained the essence out of it, color, energy, memory, all leached away. Entire mountain ranges seemed half-erased, their edges dissolving like sand brushed by an unseen hand. Valleys shifted subtly between shapes, as if the terrain were breathing. Maedra's eyes widened. This world is decaying. Aurelin corrected her softly. No, it is being unmade. The barge lurched again, harder this time. Warning runes flared red inside the cabin. Gravity spiked, then collapsed, then spiked again, slamming the squad into their restraints. Captain, Kalis shouted. Unknown gravitational flux, engines failing to compensate. A surge of psychic pressure washed over the barge, not violent but heavy, like a massive mind brushing against the hull with idle curiosity. The sensation was suffocating, ancient, a pressure so old it felt woven into the atoms of the planet. Then came the voice, not from the Vox, not from an external source, but directly inside their minds. You return again. Aurelin's breath caught. The voice was deeper now, older than the dying whisper, heavy with exhaustion and despair. His voice, future, broken, unmistakable. Before he could react, the barge's systems went into sudden freefall. Engines offline, Rhex roared. Atmospheric grip failing, we're being pulled. Pulled, not falling, pulled. By what? Aurelin sensed it then. A magnetic tug, psychic in origin, centered on one point on the planet's surface. The same point the hololith had shown earlier. The crater, the tower, the sigil, the place where the message originated. The place where his future self had died. Maedra screamed as the barge plummeted, alarms blaring in a chaotic chorus. Armor plates shook loose, straps snapped, bolters clattered across the floor. The world outside became a spiraling blur of gray and black. Aurelin braced himself against the crashing tide of gravitational distortion. He forced his enhanced mind to remain focused, calculating angles, impact trajectories, anything he could use to keep the squad alive. But then the pressure in his skull increased. The psychic presence surged again, wrapping around the barge like a giant's hand. And the dying voice spoke once more, clear as if whispered at his ear. Aurelin, you need to stop. If you land, the cycle begins again. And this time, you won't escape. Aurelin gritted his teeth, forcing the words out. Who are you? The answer came like a breath of cold wind. I am you, the first to betray him. And I have failed you again. The pressure vanished. The barge dropped like a stone. The last thing Aurelin heard before impact was the sound of his own voice, fading into a broken sob. Run, please. Then everything went white, silent, weightless. Empty. The barge struck the surface of the forgotten world. And the cycle began. The starfort Aeternum, a sprawling bastion of void-wrought adamantium, drifted at the edge of the Varan system like a wounded predator. Its cyclopean towers jutted out into the darkness, some still bearing the melted scars of long silent orbital bombardments. As Honorian approached aboard his strike cruiser, he felt the structure before he even saw it. A pressure, subtle, insidious, pressed against his consciousness, like unseen fingers testing the seams of his mind. Many warriors of the Imperium believed star forts were merely constructs, but Honorian sensed something older embedded within this one. Something that watched. The Aeternum had once been a proud outpost erected during the Emperor's Great Crusade, a symbol of reclaimed unity. But after the disastrous civil unrest on Varan, it had been abandoned. Vox recordings recovered from the ruins spoke of strange occurrences, tech priests hearing whispers in the static of data looms, servitors turning toward empty hallways as though obeying unheard commands, and entire patrols vanishing without trace. To Honorian, these were not warnings, they were invitations. And invitations from the unknown were things he could never turn from. Upon docking, the airlock sighed open like a weary beast, releasing a draft of cold, stale air. The interior of the Star Fort was a labyrinth of darkened passages and silent cogitator banks coated in the dust of decades. Honorian walked alone, deliberately leaving his escort behind. He told himself it was because he did not wish to endanger them, not yet realizing he had already begun to crave isolation. The deeper he ventured, the stronger the pressure within his skull became. Words formed at the edges of his perception, fragments, syllables, impressions, none fully coherent, yet each heavy with meaning. You seek, you hunger, you doubt. Instead of recoiling, Honorian paused and listened. Every inch of the Star Fort felt charged with a presence too deliberate to be the echo of malfunctioning machinery. When he reached the central sanctum, a massive chamber ringed with dormant plasma conduits and towering statues of ancient heroes, he felt the presence crystallize into a single point. The air grew warmer. The dust motes hung motionless, suspended as though time had stuttered. On the far dais, lit by the dying glow of a failing lumen strip, sat a sarcophagus-like device plated with obsidian and etched in symbols no mechanicum lexicon would ever approve. The whispers surged, not spoken aloud, but resonating from somewhere behind his thoughts. They offered clarity, possibility, truths the Emperor hid. They told him the Aeternum Star Fort had been built upon an anomaly, an ancient psychic scar left by a long-forgotten war. The Emperor had attempted to seal it, but the wound had never fully healed. Instead, it had festered, leaking remnants of a power older than the Imperium, older even than humanity's first steps among the stars. Honorian should have turned back. Instead, he stepped closer. The sarcophagus hummed faintly, as though recognizing him. The whispers no longer clawed at him, they welcomed him. In that moment, an intoxicating sensation washed across his mind, the promise of knowledge unfettered by dogma, of power unbound by the chains of obedience, and of truth beyond the Emperor's carefully curated vision. Honorian reached out, his fingertips brushed the obsidian surface. Something awakened, something answered, and something ancient, patient, and hungry, whispered his name. The instant Honorian's fingers made contact with the obsidian sarcophagus, a surge of psychic pressure blasted through his mind, not violent, not harmful, but enveloping, like a tidal wave of thoughts that were not his own. The chamber trembled, dust cascaded from the high vaults, and the dormant conduits sparked as though awakened by a long-forgotten command. Yet Honorian did not withdraw his hand. He stood motionless, suspended between reality and a deeper realm that had waited for him since long before his birth. A vision unfurled behind his eyes. He no longer saw the decaying Star Fort. Instead, he walked upon an endless plain of shimmering darkness, where constellations rose from beneath his feet like blooming flowers of starlight. At the horizon loomed a colossal silhouette, a figure draped in shadow, neither man nor god, but something intertwined with the fabric of the galaxy itself. It spoke without words, communicating through sensation, through the raw essence of betrayal, longing, and ancient purpose. It revealed fragments of a past Honorian was never meant to witness, wars older than Terra's oceans, civilizations erased and reborn, and a truth that chilled him. Humanity had not been the first to reach for dominion over the stars, nor would it be the last to fall. The voice guiding him was not chaotic in the way the librarius had warned. It was measured, patient, and composed. It did not promise glory or indulgence. Instead, it offered understanding, a bridge to knowledge the Emperor had barred from mortal comprehension. You have been deceived, it whispered. Not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to question. For the first time in centuries, Honorian felt the faintest flicker of resentment kindle within him. The Emperor had shaped the legions with precision, carving their minds to embody obedience, loyalty, and purpose. But purpose without truth, the voice suggested, was merely gilded servitude. As the vision blurred, a memory surfaced, one Honorian had buried so deeply he hardly recognized it. He saw himself as a newly inducted Astartes, still raw and untempered, asking his training officer why the Emperor never acknowledged their individual doubts, never offered explanations behind his edicts. The officer had dismissed him, branding such questions as distractions unworthy of a space marine. Honorian had internalized that lesson, forcing belief where curiosity should have lived. Now, centuries later, the sealed chambers of his mind cracked open, and all that repressed questioning flooded forward. The vision collapsed. Honorian stumbled back into the physical world, gasping. The sarcophagus pulsed with a faint inner glow, as though satisfied. Across the chamber, the shadows seemed deeper. The air heavier. Even the silent statues carved into the walls appeared to gaze down at him with new scrutiny. Something fundamental within him had shifted. He was still Honorian, yet not entirely. A quiet fracture had formed, small, almost imperceptible, but destined to widen. He tried to steady his thoughts, but the whispers that once lurked in the periphery now lingered openly in his mind. They did not command. They did not coerce. They merely questioned, nudging gently at the foundations of his faith. Is duty worth blindness? Is loyalty worth ignorance? Does the Emperor truly offer the truth you seek, or only the truth that suits his design? These were the questions no space marine should ever entertain. Yet Honorian felt no fear, only clarity, sharp and cold. As he turned to leave the sanctum, the lumen strips flickered in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. The star fort itself responded to him, aligning with his presence. Doors that had been sealed for decades hissed open as he approached. Data looms activated unbidden. The very walls thrummed with a resonance that matched the new cadence of his thoughts. The Aeternum had accepted him. Worse, it had chosen him. Unaware of the full consequences of what had begun, Honorian strode back toward the docking bay. His officers would ask what he had discovered, what secrets the Star Fort held. He knew he could not tell them, not because he wished to deceive, but because he sensed instinctively that they were not ready. The knowledge granted to him was not meant for those still bound by unquestioning loyalty. And so, with the first lie of his long life forming silently in his mind, Honorian returned to his warriors. The fracture had begun. When Honorian stepped back into the docking bay, every helm turned toward him. Astartes did not possess the luxury of showing unease, yet his warriors stood with an unspoken tension coiled behind their rigid posture. They sensed something had shifted, something subtle, like a change in atmospheric pressure before a violent storm. Honorian felt it too, though not in a manner that threatened him. It was simply the universe adjusting to a new trajectory, one he himself had set in motion within the ancient depths of the Star Fort. Captain Malice approached first, his armor scratched from patrols, his voice carrying the deep resonance of a veteran. "My lord, what did you find within the inner vaults?" The Auspex reading spiked. "We feared something inside might have activated." The question was simple. The answer should have been simpler. A Space Marine commander was expected never to hesitate. Yet Honorian paused, if only for a fraction of a heartbeat. That pause became the first fracture made visible. He delivered the lie smoothly, with the practiced tone of a commander accustomed to both command and restraint. "Nothing of consequence. Old machinery. Corrupted power cells. The vaults are inert." The words slid out with surprising ease, deceptively calm, as though lying had always been part of him. Yet the moment the sentence left his lips, the chamber seemed to contract around him. He felt the echo of the sarcophagus whisper through his mind, not condemning him, but acknowledging the act. A step taken cannot be undone. Malice nodded, but doubt flickered in the captain's eyes. Astartes were not trained to question their superiors, yet his superhuman instincts registered the inconsistency. Honorian saw it, felt it. The first ripple of suspicion. The first shadow cast upon trust. And in a strange, unnerving way, he felt no guilt. Instead, there was a sense of inevitability, as if the lie had always awaited its moment to be spoken. He gave new orders, concise and measured. "We depart within the hour. Mark the coordinates for restricted entry. No one enters the vaults again." His tone brooked no argument, but the warriors obeyed with the disciplined swiftness expected of the legions. They scattered to fulfill their tasks, yet their movements felt heavier, burdened by an underlying uncertainty they could neither name nor justify. As Honorian walked toward his own gunship, a soft pulse resonated through the metal beneath his boots. The Aeternum was speaking again, though not in words, more a sensation, a current brushing against his consciousness. It felt like approval, as though the ancient station recognized the significance of the lie he had just spoken. It was a moment of alignment, of two destinies intertwining, one of a forgotten relic awakening, and the other of a space marine stepping onto a path he had never intended to walk. Before boarding, Honorian paused at the threshold. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, back to the vision, to the silhouette of the cosmic figure that had spoken to him without sound. The doubts that had awakened within him stayed close, circulating like a second bloodstream. With each passing moment, the clarity granted to him in the vault heightened. Questions he would have once dismissed now formed with precision. Why had the Emperor locked away such knowledge? Why had he built legions designed to obey rather than understand? What truths lay buried beneath sanctioned history? These questions coiled through his mind, but he locked them behind a stoic mask as he entered the transport. The engines roared, the bay doors opened, and the gunship ascended toward the orbit where their strike cruiser waited. Outside, the star fort drifted in silence, but deep within its metal bones, something stirred, reactivated by Honorian's presence, awakened from a slumber that predated the Imperium itself. As the gunship rose, Malice glanced at his commander again. The captain said nothing, but suspicion had taken root. Honorian sensed it in the tightness of his posture, the stiffness behind his otherwise mechanical movements. Once, such doubt in an officer would have concerned him. Now, he merely observed it, acknowledging it as part of the new truth he carried alone. For the first time in centuries, Honorian felt separate from his legion, not physically, but ideologically. There was his path, and there was theirs. And though they did not yet know it, those paths were no longer aligned. The first lie had been spoken. Others would follow. By the time Honorian returned to the vigilant flame, a storm raged not just outside the ship, but within the very core of his being. The knowledge he carried was no longer abstract, it was living, breathing, and pressing upon every fiber of his enhanced body. The sarcophagus, the whispers, the visions, they were part of him now, a constant, insidious companion. He could no longer see the Emperor as the absolute truth, the unassailable guide, the certainty that had sustained him for centuries had fractured irreparably. The signal calling his name pulsed again through the void, faint but unmistakable. It was not an order, not a plea, not even a warning this time. It was inevitability itself, echoing from the future, from a self that had already walked the path he now chose. His future self, broken and haunted, had tried to prevent what was about to occur, and yet it was already set in motion. Honorian stood alone in the stratageum, the familiar hum of the ship's systems failing to comfort him. Maedra approached cautiously, sensing the change in him. "Captain, what have you learned?" He met her gaze, his expression calm yet hollow. "The Emperor will not intervene." The words felt strange even as they left his lips, carrying the weight of both revelation and resignation. "And neither will I obey blindly any longer." Maedra's eyes widened in horror, understanding dawning too late. I mean, he said quietly, that the first betrayal has already begun. Not because I desire it, but because I understand it is inevitable. The vigilant flame shuddered as the warp currents outside thickened, a reflection of the moral and psychic storm within him. Honorian felt no remorse, only clarity. The path before him was terrible, but lucid. He knew now that the cycle of loyalty and treachery was not a flaw to be eradicated, it was a force older than the Imperium, one the Emperor himself could not entirely control. He turned from Maedra, walking with measured steps toward the vessel's command deck. Each step carried the weight of inevitability. He had seen his future self. He had spoken to his future self. And he had realized that some fates could not be avoided, no matter the devotion of a space marine. The first act of betrayal was simple, almost mundane, a refusal to follow orders unquestioningly, a choice to prioritize understanding over obedience. But its ripples would grow, consuming the certainty of the legions and eventually spreading into the wider Imperium. What began with one man, a single captain who dared to question, to defy, to think, would one day become legend, whispered in dread and awe by those who came after. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Honorian felt the final whisper in his mind, a voice he had known all his life yet had never truly heard. "Do not fear what you are about to become. Fear only the silence that comes after." And with that, the first space marine who dared betray the Emperor walked fully into his destiny. Alone, enlightened, and irrevocably changed. The cycle had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. With that said, thanks for watching and until next time.